Before we start today's roundtable, I want to give special thanks to Checkster, our group sponsor. Checkster has become well known in the recruiting industry by providing a platform that easily captures reference checks in the hiring process. I myself have been a customer of theirs for years. I use a reference checking tool for all of my new hires. However, Checkster has now released a new product suite called Insights. This new product suite is really what has excited me to have Checkster as the group sponsor. With Insights, the Checkster platform now covers employees from cradle to grave and not just reference checking, starting when they apply, going to offer, through onboarding, then covering their work at your company, and then to the end with exit interviews. It's an easy to use, easy to understand way of giving and getting feedback from your peers. Checkster's simple goal: to build more productive and passionate teams. Now, if this concept of getting insights from your peers regarding your work sounds familiar, it should, because that's the simple goal of this group: connecting, communicating, collaborating. Support me, support the group. Follow the link below, recruiting.org/Checkster. This will take you to a landing page to sign up for a quick demo. If you're just thinking about automating your reference checking process, it'll be well worth your time. But I encourage you to check out the full Insights suite. I'd love to find out if you feel the way I feel about it. Now let's get to today's roundtable.
Awesome. All right, let's do it. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining our diversity, equity, and inclusion sessions that we're having now once a month, the second Tuesday of every month and not the second Wednesday, just so that everyone's knowing. So this morning's session is about how to tell if your diversity program is working. We're really excited to talk to you this morning. I'm here with Kim, Melissa, Anna, and Sean, who will do their own introductions. I'm your moderator, Christina Sharif. I am the head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging for Reddit Inc., which is an internet company. And we are coming to you, like I mentioned, the second Tuesday of every month. Just sort of a shameless plug about the upcoming sessions as well. Today is about telling if your diversity program is working. Next month, we'll talk a little bit about your diversity recruiting strategy for university recruiting. And then I know there was a lot of questions last time around unconscious bias training, so we'll talk a little bit about that in the coming months as well. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat while we're doing our discussion. There is absolutely no such thing as a stupid question. This is a forum for everyone to learn, and we're all still learning. So please feel free to leave any questions, and if we cite any resources while we're talking, we'll try to leave them in the chat as well so that everyone can have them moving forward. So here we are. Kim, I thought maybe we could start our discussion today and talk a little bit around what happens before even candidates come through the door. So do you have any ideas around how to tell if you're sourcing diverse talent? What are your ideas around that?
Sure. Well, first, to introduce myself, Kim Lonis. I've been with Stampede as Director of Human Resources.
Hey, Kim? Kim, can I get you to move a little bit closer?
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. I am Director of Human Resources for Stampede. I've been with them for the past 5 years. As well, I'm a partner in a national executive search firm that specializes in insurance and risk management. And my staffing industry experience spans about 25 years. Recruiting or talent acquisition recruiting has to start early.
Kim? Yeah. Hey, I don't know if you have to press. It's just hard to listen to you. You don't have to press on the microphone thing, but just sort of move it up a little bit. Maybe it's hard to hear.
Better?
That's better.
Might be time for a new headset. I mentioned we specialize in professional audio visual. So, to answer your question, as far as diversity recruiting, posting and getting the word out there to the standard sites used to be Indeed, LinkedIn, and a handful of university websites before I really started becoming involved in diversity organizations. And those organizations opened my eyes up to what diversity means. And so now, instead of just the standard handful of platforms that we use for recruiting and job fairs, now we've expanded. And actually, Christina, I think in one of the panels that you said on, you talked about this as well, and I did a deep dive into how many different diversity websites there are out there or opportunities to post jobs. And there are if you really dig into the internet, there are well over 100 different organizations that you can put your job out to, so that when you're looking at candidates, it's not just the same people from your local community that you've seen time and time again. It's, it's expanded beyond what your comfort zone is, and looking at diversity in a lot of different ways. There are, from a diversity standpoint, there's cultural diversity, racial diversity, religious and age diversity, sex and gender diversity. So I guess my thought would be not to limit it to just male and female or gender specific diversity, or cultural racial diversity, but to expand beyond that, because there is a lot of different resources there from a posting early on to try and draw people into your jobs.
Sure, yeah, that makes total sense. And there are tons of sites, and that are also industry specific, right? I know that you mentioned that you're in the technology industry. Were there any sites specifically for your industry that you find to be helpful from a diversity perspective?
Site specific to our industry, well, AVIXA is an organization, a trade show organization specific to the pro AV industry. And that actually is a really good resource for us, because they have now a diversity group. Actually, it's been in place for about 2 years, and I'm an active member on that council. And so for posting there, that's definitely specific to our industry and does touch on a wide variety of diverse individuals.
Perfect. Can you mention that name one more time? Because I think we lost you a little bit, and some people would like to have it to go back to later.
AVIXA, AVIXA.
AVISA or X?
IXA.
Got it. AVIXA. AVIX as an X-ray A. For anyone
Correct.
who's wants to put that down. Okay, fantastic. All right, so we're posting to a variety of websites, sort of reaching out to other candidates that we might not normally reach out to. And then how do we, once they're in sort of working for us, right? Are we measuring the progress year over year? What are your thoughts around how we measure over time?
Yeah, and I think it's as easy as tracking year over year. There are some limitations to some of the information that we can gather and track. However, the easiest, and I think for most companies that maybe are starting to look at diversity and inclusion, if they even started with gender specific, let's take a look at the number of candidates that you're bringing in. Let's take a look at your pool of individuals who are working directly for you. What's the mix? So if you take a look at last year, maybe you're 75% male, 25% female, and progression isn't going to happen in big leaps and bounds. If you're doing it properly, it will happen year over year, but don't expect, 25% go to 50%, because you want to encourage all applicants, and you want to identify the best person, obviously, for the job. But if you do track it year over year and quarter after quarter, that's a good starting point.
Yeah, one of the things that I found to be important too is that we want to make it part of the DNA of the company, right?
Absolutely.
Versus it only being about the numbers. The numbers are really important, as you mentioned, but expecting leaps and bounds. Sometimes what's more important is before we start sending the participants to a cooking competition, we want to make sure they have the recipe down first, right? It's sometimes making it part of the DNA is really part of making it creating the recipe. So we're measuring year over year or quarter over quarter, like you said. We're posting to a variety of different websites. Is there anything that can be done internally, do you think, that to encourage diversity and more than diversity, retention, right? So do you think that there's anything that can be done while folks are there to encourage people staying?
Absolutely. I think when you identify great talent, and you for a lot of
We lost you altogether, Kim. Sorry.
better.
Yep, better.
Okay. I think as you bring people in, there are a lot of different things that you can do, realizing that when you're building a diverse workforce, that your cookie cutter format for bringing people on board and onboarding them that was good 3 years ago may not necessarily be good today. So constantly reevaluating that. We've created a mentorship program. So when people come on board, they're partnered with somebody internally. And I think this goes to not only diversity, but as a company as a whole, for anybody who's coming on board, to when we talk about inclusion, how do you make people feel comfortable? And it's easy to assume people are going to come in and they know their job and they're hired for a certain reason. But I actually think it's good to partner them with somebody who can answer all those questions that maybe they don't feel comfortable asking their direct manager about, or can give them insight into the company beyond just their job. Whether it's, hey, we play softball on Fridays, you want to come and play softball? Of course, that's pre-COVID. Things like that. I think partnering them with a mentor is important. Including them in any discussions that are happening, even the smallest discussions, to make them feel like they're part of the process, part of the team, as people come on board.
That makes perfect sense. And I've seen it happen like in a couple of different ways where you have like a buddy when you come on board and an actual mentorship program. Let me ask you this from a retention perspective. Do you think, or have you seen any companies making sort of an intentional, deliberate effort and making sure that, you know, if you have an overall mentorship program or any other sort of developmental opportunities, how do we sort of take out the bias to make sure that folks from diverse populations are also in those, like, are fully taking advantage of those development opportunities? Do you see it more like everybody gets a mentor, or, you know, in certain cases where high potential people are getting mentors? What's been your experience with that?
I think it's a combination. In our organization, within Stampede, every new person who comes on board is now getting a mentor. It doesn't necessarily have to be from their department. It could be out of their department, because it does make a difference. And this mentorship can last 3 months, 6 months, or be ongoing, depending on what the role is. But as well, when people are promoted within the organization, if we've identified that this is a stretch role for somebody, we will partner them with a mentor there as well. Again, it's not diversity specific, but it's inclusion specific, to make sure people understand their role, understand the company, and feel welcome in that, whether it's a current role or somebody coming new into the company.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you so much, Kim. So we've posted to a variety of different websites that maybe we wouldn't normally post to. We are measuring sort of either quarter over quarter or year over year against our goals. We're also making sure that people have mentors walking through the door. But then once people are in the door, Melissa, would you mind introducing yourself and talking to us a little bit about some things that you've seen happen at various companies when people are walking into the door? So for individuals to really get a grasp on what they'd like to see their company doing from a D&I perspective.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Melissa Medrano, and I'd like to talk about both my current company, which is, a much more junior company, but has very much been embracing, um, sort of getting into sort of the DEI initiatives. And then my past company was a much larger company, but they essentially underwent a transformation. Um, so my last company was Gilead Sciences, and I think largely the pharmaceutical environment, has embraced diversity initiatives. Um, as a general rule, all the data that are out there, scientists listen to that. So I think they think about, the Netflix study and things like that. Really, let's get some creative. It doesn't sound creativity and scientists don't always go together, but so how do we get creative scientists in to attack disease in a new way? And so Gilead had done a survey that was really striking in that people did not feel that it was celebrating diversity, or that people who were underrepresented weren't necessarily uh, seeing that they had the same sort of opportunities as others. And so within like a year, Gilead had generated ERGs, executive sponsors for ERGs. I hear, especially in the Bay Area, that there are a lot of ERGs that struggle to get funding from their companies. Ours were ridiculously well funded, and not only for just throwing parties and having mixers, but to give back to the community and things like that as well. People were involved in tutoring, mentoring, classroom discussions for the K through 12 kinds of initiatives. And then, we had a robust internship program that also was highlighting on diversity. And so that really was just a great example of top to bottom, people, leaders writing it in their goals, that we're going to try to be more open to being, very strategically and thoughtfully um, diverse, more diverse, I guess. And then, at NGM, I joined a year ago, and there was there were no diversity initiatives when I joined, and really a handful of uh, African American people, and I'm one of a handful of Hispanic people, and it's just very interesting. So, but what happened, and I'm so proud of my company, is with all of the recent violence and everything, everybody just kind of stood up and said, we really want to work on this. And so it's definitely a work in progress. We're coming together. We're a 200-person company. We really don't have separate ERGs. So we have kind of one ERG, but we've broken into different pillars and are sort of very much grassroots, kind of trying to work on, helping talent acquisition bring in more diverse talent, as well as just in general community outreach and internships and things like that as well. And I think, the point where we are is, we're at the point of starting to say, are we going to ask for money from our executive committee, or are we just going to continue to try to do this in a grassroots way, or and how are we going to ask for money and participation, hours and things like that too. So I think it's just really market, also, with what you can do with resources and executive sponsorship, like was fully embraced at Gilead. And, our executive sponsors are like, yeah, we support you, but it's more of a, go ahead and, don't ask for money yet, or things like that.
No, that makes sense. And, a lot of it does boil down to resources that are available, not even necessarily financial, but just also support. Let me ask you this. I know that you came from a place that had a pretty solid ERG program.
Yes.
However, that also was sort of before the atrocity that's 2020 in general, and then of course before a lot of the sort of social justice uprising that's happened. Right. How heavily do you think did the business rely on ERGs to actually give input about some of the direction of the company as it pertained to diverse populations of people maybe before versus now? Do you see the business, even though it's not like multiple ERGs that you have right now, do you see the business relying on the diversity committee, if you will, in making business decisions? And I guess I'll open this up to everyone as well. Are we seeing a difference with, I know ERGs traditionally in the past, and you sort of mentioned this, Melissa, like we use some of the money for parties, some of the money for different emphasis on cultural months, etc. But
Mhm.
from my experience, it seems like the business is also pulling on ERGs right now, and thinking about making decisions with its employees. Have we seen any of that happening in your experiences as well?
The ERGs were hugely influential, and at Gilead, for example, in terms of making recommendations, but also, doing the heavy lifting. And I think I smiled when you mentioned that too with committees, because I was on a diversity call last week that was like, committees are something that companies use when they don't want to put money behind it. Basically, it's like free volunteerism if you're on the different committees. And so that's kind of it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's kind of true. And so that's been an interesting discussion in terms of kind of how much impact we will eventually have, for example, with the ERG. But I know that at Gilead they were hugely impactful, and
Yeah.
that was also part of the reason why they made that very conscious decision to have uh, very high level execs as the executive sponsors, because it came from the top, and they fully embraced it and got behind it like 100%. So it was absolutely making an impact in decision making and things like that too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Christina, I'll add that if you can get like a high level champion for an ERG, that's probably a great way to get that leverage in there. I've seen ERGs at Genentech, at Universal Music really have a good foundation for getting their voices heard and getting events, getting budget. I would agree with Melissa. It is seen as like kind of like a committee to go do things, right? Which is fine in my opinion. It's about getting that voice out and getting that expression. If you're at a large size company, you might get some budget. Probably really hard at the smaller size company. One thing I would love to see ERGs empower themselves is typically like an ERG is specific for your company's employees. Oh, okay, I get that. Coming on site back in the day when we could do that is a thing. I would love to see one ERG group at company one connect with the same ERG group at company 2, 3, and 4. Right? You could just get a meetup account on meetup.com, and if you're in the local area and this is your focus,
Yeah.
in the same industry, location, or profession, that kind of, I would love to see a company or ERG members empower themselves by connecting not just inside your company, but your same focus with the groups that are out there. Because I think there's a lot of companies trying to build out ERGs, but it is kind of left to the employees' effort for the most part.
That's definitely been something we're exploring. At Gilead, we actually had a few joint events with Gileados and a few of the other ERGs in the Bay Area, where we were able to invite speakers and things like that too. So and actually, I'm looking to partner, with other smaller companies or even larger companies too, just because otherwise it can be very difficult to do this like on your own and super grassroots style with like sweat at your brow and that's about it.
Sure, and you'd be surprised at how many other companies are doing great things with their
Mhm.
ERGs. Has anyone on the call used an ERG to partner with recruiting? I know one of the things that we're doing here is offering a chat with one of the members for our ERGs for candidates that make it past the first level of candidacy, so they can see what it's like and like ask real questions, what it's like to be Latinx at Reddit or Black at Reddit. Is anybody else using their ERGs for similar purposes, or maybe to bring in candidates for the recruiting team? No?
We did that
Well,
a
that could
lot
be,
at Gilead.
you do that a lot. Yeah, that could be
A lot. Yep.
helpful. Just,
Absolutely.
my little
It
two
was it
cents has
was
been
very
successful
helpful.
for us. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
successful.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Hey, Christina,
yes,
so who would champion that? The ERG group or somebody in recruiting?
really interesting. I think it's a partnership, but the way that I've seen it, the ERG group has championed it and has used their broad network. And again, like it's slightly different when you work for like a well-known brand where you're going to have people automatically signing up to do your virtual events, even if it's just to learn. And the way that we've sort of messaged it is like, learn what it's like to be, a software engineer at this company. And we had hundreds of people log on to a virtual Zoom recruiting session. We had a couple of different breakout rooms, and then of course asked for everyone's resume at the end. And the recruiters were in some of the breakout rooms as well, there to answer questions. And then the breakout rooms consist of learning sessions. So we'd have people from the business talking about their areas of the business, and participants could really just like float in and out of rooms and see, what they're interested in. And then we collected resumes from there. That was some of our larger events that we did.
Excellent.
And
Everybody,
so you could use ERGs to like push the business forward too, and sometimes it's easier to get a really great high level champion, like you mentioned, Sean, when, we're using it for the business too. And sometimes it's also easier to get money like that. Okay, so we have our ERGs in place. We're measuring quarter over quarter. And now, like, Anna, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself too, like, can we talk a little bit about getting the leaders involved, right? And how important is that to a successful diversity and inclusion program? And how do we measure how successful our diversity and inclusion program is by the amount of input that we have from leadership?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. So just brief introduction. My name is Anna Forsberg, and I, just like many of you, have dedicated my entire career to recruiting, talent acquisition. And over the past 10 years, a lot of it has been around diversity outreach, attracting diverse top talent and making sure we have a good, warm, welcoming recruiting experience where everyone feels welcome. Even if you don't get the job, you want to leave that process feeling that that was a great company, that was a good process. I will spread the word within the talent community and I will apply again. I have worked within public and private. I have worked in education, energy, local government. Currently, I'm in healthcare with a company called Innovate. So we are recruiting for healthcare professionals. And from a diversity perspective, I've also done some consulting with Triad Diversity Consulting based here in Colorado. I'm obviously very passionate about this topic, so I usually get myself involved in all kinds of initiatives and efforts and programs in whatever role I'm in. And some of the things that, to the point of today's conversation, how do we know that the diversity program is working? I think to your point, that when leaders get involved, when it goes from HR pushing to business leaders pulling, then we know we have done something, and these efforts are really taking root in our organizations and really starting to drive itself forward. I think, looking at the hiring process itself, there are some really telling signs that we are effective. And one of them, the first and most obvious is when the hiring manager comes to you and says, hey, I really would like a diverse slate of candidates. Instead of us pushing, hey, hiring manager, have you noticed that you only have men working within your group? How about, maybe you should start to attract some female candidates, but when they come to us and recognize this and asking us to do something for them, then we have a program that is in place and it's working well.
Yeah.
Another one is when they're, to your point earlier, talking about money, we don't want to spend money, but when the hiring manager comes to us and want to spend money on diversity outreach, they want to advertise in certain places where they can reach a diverse audience, then that's a really great sign too. I mean, that goes back to our saying, put your money where your mouth is, right? You really stand behind it. You want to invest in it. You feel strongly about it. So those are just a couple of good signs.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So do you have, let's say that HR is still at a place where they're pushing it and they want the program to be successful, but the hiring manager is not necessarily not on board, right? I don't know if anybody blatantly says anymore, I don't want a diverse slate of candidates, right? But what if they're not exactly pushing it? Are there any ways that we've discovered, and I'll open this up to everyone as well, to get over some of those roadblocks so that we can continue on the path to success with these programs?
Well, I can kick it off. I think, you bring it back to business. Yeah, you can't say you don't want a diverse workforce, but can you say you don't want a successful business? Like, we know that research shows that a diverse workforce leads to diverse perspectives, leads to better business strategy, better decisions, ultimately innovation, creativity, business growth. Why would you not want that? So if we start there, we kind of align on that and we agree on that, and then the rest kind of follows. Like, well, if you want that, then maybe we can help you. Maybe we can add a little bit more perspective in this area. Maybe we can even look at your workforce demographics, use some data. You're doing really well over here, hiring manager, but over here, you may have an opportunity to recruit in a very targeted way to make sure you have a diverse workforce.
Yeah. What's the biggest roadblock that we're running into? I know for me, what I've found is that hiring managers want things done right away. And so sometimes, even if they do want a diverse slate, they'll sacrifice that for the immediacy. Is there anyone else that also has sort of the same issue? And if so, how have you gotten over some of those roadblocks so that we can continue to be successful with the diversity and inclusion program?
I can bring something up. One of the, I think, more challenging things that we've been kind of talking about recently is, for especially for science, when we review resumes, we also look at people's like publications, for example. And of course, school and pedigree is always one of those things, which we also know comes in part from privilege. And so a lot of the times, if hiring managers want to see the nature, science, and cell publications, those are not necessarily going to be coming from a smaller lab at a less well-funded university. So how do you kind of weigh their publications in, quote unquote, lesser journals, even though they're still reviewed, peer reviewed and scientifically, sound. How do we get away from kind of the thinking about pedigree to thinking about the quality of the work, and another way to sort of quantify and qualify that is just because, getting hiring managers away from looking at people who've only published in, top journals or things like that. I mean, that's a lot of what sort of narrows the field, really, the playing field.
That makes sense. And I actually think that's totally applicable outside of your field as well. When we talk about transferable skills, right? What can be versus what can be taught in 6 months, the 6 month smell test, right? Like after somebody gets over the learning curve for 6 months, let's look then at how different the organization might be. And it sounds very similar to what you're saying, in that, what can we not necessarily even make concessions for, right?
Right.
But how can we sort of expand? Where's the opportunity for us to expand our definition of success and the scalability of that, right? To which scale someone's had that, and how closely is that linked to their opportunity and access? Which, you're right, really sort of narrows that window down when you start to consider who will have had that opportunity and access, right? Really good point. So Anna, we're making sure that the hiring managers are on board, putting their money where their mouth is, right? Do you have any opinions around, anything that you can glean from your experience around making sure that the interview panels are also diverse? How important is that in addition to the slate of candidates?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. I think that's great. It's excellent. It's super important. And, I just sometimes look at it myself, trying to put myself in a position if I walk into an interview and I am welcomed by a panel of only middle-aged white men. How would I feel? And you can substitute that, with anyone else, but how would you feel as a candidate if you can't see yourself even on the interview panel, can you see yourself with a company?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is like the first step in creating that welcoming experience, that you have to be intentional when you put together these panels, and you want to educate your hiring managers and your teams on, like, it is important. When you're picking people, it's not just who knows the job and can assess new talent, but it's also a representation of who we are as a company.
Yeah.
Pick different gender, pick different ages, different backgrounds. Make sure you have a good representation on that. It's very important.
Absolutely. You want candidates to feel like they belong there, right? There's no worse feeling than somebody walking in and saying, "This is not my tribe."
Exactly.
I did this. I don't. So you're
Christine,
totally right.
let me
Yes.
add a real world problem, not a
Yeah.
problem, but a hurdle to get over with. Talking with a company, a VP of talent, they're trying to build out diversity in their engineering groups and kind of going team by team. Well, in one of their teams that they're really focusing on building diversity, they only had one woman engineer in there. So they're on board with, hey, bring her in during these panels, and then it's turning out that she has to be in all of these interviews. So
Mm,
she can't. So she tries to be in there where she can, but kind of like that's like a real world hurdle to get over. My recommendation was, if she can't be in that interview with another, let's say, woman engineer coming in there, send a follow-up email to get that touch point, because we understand
sure.
she's got to do her work. But to your points, connect with somebody there. So just that follow-up one-to-one, that was my sort of recommendation back, assuming she can't stop doing her engineering job to do a recruiting job. But it's kind of a funny predicament that the company found themselves into. And if you're a smaller size company starting off early with D&I efforts, that's probably something you're going to run into also.
Sure. I almost love that they're having that problem though, because it really shows that they're starting
Yes.
very early in their journey. They're thinking about what's important. But you're right, like a total real world problem, and in larger organizations where, I think women engineers just sort of all around um, are just a lower demographic in most companies than male engineers. And so even in larger organizations that have this problem, I know sometimes they have ERGs that are specifically for women, and that could also be a good touch point to have somebody from the ERG reach out as well for candidates, because you're right, like putting a lot of stress on one or just a couple of individuals to be part of those interview panels. It's a really good point. So the interview panels are diverse. Are we using data to track where we still need to focus on from a diversity perspective, Anna?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of looking at whether or not our program is working, I mean, the ultimate sign, I think, is when our hiring managers and our teams are starting to include diversity and components of that into their strategic staffing planning.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come to us and ask for data to plug in, to forecast, to look at where we need to be in the future, I think then you really have integrated this to a very systemic level within your organization. That's an ultimate telltale sign that you are effective and that this program is working. And you can measure a variety of different aspects of that. There are so many positive business outcomes that come out of a diverse workforce. You can look at turnover rate and engagement scores and time to fill, how long, how people are feeling about being in the organization. So there's so many good positive benefits of having this, and yeah, you can measure it from a variety of angles.
Yeah, that's good. Is there anyone else using engagement scores or surveys to measure how effective the diversity program is, but also how the employees are feeling about the diversity at the company, which also sort of just goes hand in hand with what we're trying to do on the TA side?
I'm going to jump in. We're not doing it specific to our company, but I mentioned Avixa as an organization that's specific to the Pro AV industry, and we're actually going through the creation of a survey that we're going out industry-wide. And it's interesting that companies can create a DE&I program, but are there employees who are currently in place seeing that, great, you have the program, but are we seeing it, and do we feel it at the company once it's been put in place? And so we're going through that right now as far as, the survey includes, are there affinity networks and groups, and are you happy with how your company is representing itself in the market, and are you seeing it within the organization? So definitely something that's out there.
Yeah, that's good.
Hey,
And
Christina,
we know this. Yes,
if I could add to that. So I know a lot of companies do the employee survey typically year once a year. I've seen companies do it once every other year. I've seen it done easy, and I've seen it where it's like they do it every 2 years because it takes 2 years to get everybody to agree to the questions that go out.
Mhm.
Especially if you're a global company, you got to deal with global issues. I for one am okay. That's great that companies do that. I'm just a big believer in that. Rather than once a year big survey, more frequent, smaller size surveys. Because if you're just asking somebody, "Do you feel included?" once a year, is that really getting everything? And can you adjust by that? Or if you're getting almost like the stock market goes up and down, right? Good or bad. If you're getting smaller size surveys or questionnaires that are targeted around that are more contextual to a person going into a meeting, did a presentation, am I being heard? Are people disregarding me? Did I felt heard? On like that smaller size ongoing, I think that's the real way to get kind of the pulse of your patients, so to speak, or your employees on an ongoing basis versus the once a year checkup, right? So that's what I'd love to see companies going towards is more smaller size surveys, but much more frequent, more contextual to the given situation. That's because to your point, how do you, because I can measure ATS reports and HRS data all the time. That's easy to do because it's, bits and bytes. But that feeling of being included and was I included and does my emotion change? Is it just with this one group, but that other group is fantastic? That type of vibe coming out of an inclusion program, I think is going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Sean, when do we measure? This is a question that's been on my mind. You measured like in smaller increments throughout the year, right? But a lot of times things can happen even when it's not 2020, right? There could be large company moves. There could be. Is it good to measure when there's lots of emotion involved and there's big changes? Like what have you seen as sort of, or have you seen the best times to get a accurate forecast of what's happening?
So let me counter that a little bit. Is it good to ask when emotions are running high? No, but that's when people really want to express themselves. So, hey, let's ask and feel it. But if you ask a bunch of times over time, it starts to level itself off to get that underlying feeling. So I've seen both ends of the stick, in my opinion. I've seen the once every 2 year survey, and then I was at a hedge fund company that they give feedback every meeting on people. So that's like the extreme. I would never recommend what that company did, but it was on. And they would compile all these little bits of information, the survey, the feedback, into a broader picture. And people could give you feedback, whether you asked for it or not, and you could ask for feedback. So that's where when you talk about timing, I think it should be around milestones, around bigger things, such as for recruiting. We made a fill. That's a great opportunity for a survey to go to the hiring manager about the recruiter and the services they delivered, to the candidate and the experience they delivered, to the recruiter about the hiring manager. Was this hiring manager responsive? So all those little like events, or if you're in marketing, you did a big presentation. Here's kind of a flip on everything. Usually surveys are initiated by the company. What if the employee could initiate a request? Hey, I just did that presentation to these 10 people in the room. I would like your feedback for me. So now I'm getting into personal development. It's not to be reviewed to see if I get my raise or not. You're giving me feedback for me to use in my personal development. So it's kind of a flip on surveys and that feedback. There's always a survey hanging off the tree where, hey, I don't feel like I'm being included. I want to go be able to fill out a survey. Click here to get it. This feedback goes. Anonymous, naming names. I don't know what's the best there. But to have these surveys available for feedback back, it's like a comment box. But again, I just think context is very important into really understanding people.
So very good. Like sort of cultivating that culture of feedback is fantastic.
Culture, I think, is the key word there, right? Mm-hmm. If you can get that culture, whether it's the CEOs saying it or it's just the people saying it, if you can get that culture of feedback and positive criticism, and then have a caring company too. I've seen companies that I was there. Oh,
Savage about it. Savage.
I was at one company. They solved all their negative feedback in one fell swoop. Guess what they did?
But made it public? What? Or fired everyone?
Well, they just stopped doing the survey. That's all they
Oh,
solved.
that's not good. Yeah, that's the thing. That's not good. And what's also so interesting about your point is that as a TA community, oftentimes we don't have much of a say around when the company does their survey, right? Like we don't get to dictate, okay, we're doing the yearly survey now, or we want to see it on a quarterly basis. But if we send out touch points, we could always create like feedback mechanisms throughout our process and build those in. That way, we at least have some data on our end, and we can either roll that up into larger, sets of data if we want to create a larger story, or roll that up into other departments. So Sean is our in-house data expert, right? And I've been wanting to ask him this because, all right, so we have this program, right? Most of which, by the way, is focused on diversity, especially from the TA perspective, right? How to get people through the door, how to diversify the slate of candidates. Okay, so they're here now. How do we keep them? Like, Sean, how do we measure like what the retention is looking like?
Right. So kind of to your point, hey, recruiting handles the intake, right? And then kind of pass the baton on to others with hope. And then we get to deal with issues when they depart. So my item that I want to touch on.
Get to deal with issues. That's the privilege, right?
Well, it's fun to look at when you get a rec. Is it a net new rec? Is it a new position, or is it a backfill? And why do certain areas have all this backfill, and why? Just out of curiosity. But and bear with me because I'm kind of connecting the dots here a little bit. I want to kind of bring up the concept of your exit interviews. And this is an excellent time for surveys and getting that information. So in my opinion, you got to kind of buy into my big picture here. I think D&I is a group effort made up of different teams. You got your recruiting people who bring in diversity. You got your HR who kind of help with the ERGs, and employees run the ERG groups. And then there's the L&D group. Learning development, your company may or may not have one. Maybe it's HR's job to do learning and development. But when I've looked at data at companies around diversity issues, and you start to look at management level versus the company as a whole. So a lot of companies that commit to addressing D&I, they do pretty good when it comes to entry level and individual contributor level positions. If there's an issue, you can kind of resolve it through kind of what Kim was talking about, bringing in diversity at the top of the funnel applicants. But when you get into senior management and executive level, that's when tough conversations need to be had and are usually kind of held in private, so to speak, because there's issues there. So I come back to, well, hey, if I can show you the diversity funnel is the same at the application to hire, right? We don't have any, let's say we've addressed bias interviewing and we're good there. And it really is at those senior level positions, there's not a lot of diversity coming as applicants. So if that is an issue and that is sort of a talent pool situation where, hey, if you show us a diverse set of senior leaders, we'll go into hiring them. We talk about bringing, you have to have one person of color in the candidate pool. One? Well, that's not very many. So my thing is for the greater good. That's why I was kind of referencing ERGs and connecting with companies out there. If we are going to take a greater good approach as an individual company, hey, let's upskill our employee base. Once you're an employee, you're kind of in the family. Is our L&D upskilling you? Are they raising your bar? And when they upskill you, they're upskilling everybody. So the rising tide raises all boats philosophy, right? So here's where the exit piece comes into play. If you are upskilling your diverse talent at your company, the pyramid goes up, right? There's not so much opportunity as the higher you go up. So here's my belief. If your program is working correctly in regards to L&D, if you look at exits where they're going out and up. So if your diverse talent is taking promotions at other companies, they're leaving your company and going up in their career, that's a sign of a good L&D. You are upskilling your employee base. Wish they stayed here, but there's literally no place for them to go because you're doing such a great job. If your talent is leaving laterally, they're just taking kind of the same position at another company, well, you're not doing your job because you're not increasing their skill level. My big thing is if you can track this down, and it's easier said than done, when somebody leaves, and it may just be, hey, wait 4 weeks and go look at their LinkedIn
The
profile.
LinkedIn, right?
I mean, that's kind of
Stalk,
the way I
stalk,
stalk
yeah.
them. Calendar invite 4 weeks from now, they should have their LinkedIn updated by then.
Right.
But if they're leaving, going out and up, that's a sign of a good L&D program. Again, you want to keep them in your company, but for L&D, that's really not their concern. Their main concern is to upskill you, and then it's HR and recruiting to keep them here in open positions. But that's where I talk about, hey, let's keep track of our exits, especially when it comes to D&I, to see if we're doing that little piece of it to come to the greater good. So I had a conversation with the same person at that same company I was referencing earlier, where he said, hey, if my recruiters go and recruit diverse talent out of company X and I bring them over here, hey, I'm making my company more diverse, but I'm weakening that other company if they're doing that lateral move. What are we doing to raise the talent pool so they're going up rather than lateral? Because he's like, isn't that for the greater good? And he's like, you're absolutely right. Because each company is kind of doing things for their own, which is right. Hey, we're all in it to make money for our company to make a profit. But from the bigger picture, the greater good, I would love to see that upskilling to increase the talent pool at those senior level positions. So, and you only really know if you do that if you start asking people, hey, when you leaving, where are you going? And they may or may not tell you. But that's, to me, I would put out an effort around there. It's easy to get. You can either do a survey or if you do an exit interviews or what have you to kind of track, hey, are we handling that upskilling piece of our diverse talent? I've never seen any company do it. So it's a challenge to everybody. But that's that exit. Are we raising our talent? And if they're leaving, let's make sure they're going up for their own betterment. That's my.
No, that's really good too, because if they're leaving and going to another lateral position, they're leaving for a reason, right? Like if they're leaving and up leveling themselves, they're going for a promotion. I mean, like that's a professional reason. But if they're leaving to take a lateral move, normally there's also something else happening within the culture that's causing that, and that is also a really good opportunity to take a deeper look.
Agreed.
So really good point. Yeah, really good point on that. So I know that we're running a little bit close to time here. I did sort of want to also add in, Sean, that you mentioned the L&D program, right? And making sure that we're up leveling. I mean, L&D is obviously responsible for all employees, but has anybody had any experiences here making sure that our employees that are of diverse populations are being included in those L&D programs, right? Because a lot of times, in addition to sort of more general L&D programs, there's certain programs for high potential employees and certain tracks that folks are on. Are we having conversations or encouraging conversations with hiring managers, et cetera, to make sure that they're looking at all their entire team to be considered for those programs?
Yeah, we actually, within our DEI strategy, we've come up with 5 pillars, and one of them is uh, uh, career advancement and advocacy internally. So we're, again, smaller companies. So right now, what we've been focused on as a starting point is just getting all of our career ladders in place. We're a relatively newly public company and stuff like that too. So really mapping out, okay, what does it look like? Not just years experience. What are the skills and competencies that you bring to the table? And that's also empowering for people as well, because then they can kind of plan their own development, and kind of say, okay, this is what this trajectory looks like, and then I could either continue to move upward, or another thing that can be really helpful is also lateral moves within the company to another function, because that allows people to upskill themselves without necessarily, if they're not ready for a promotion at that point, for example. And so, for example, we had someone who was a formulation chemist and ended up taking over our clinical supply chain. And so he was kind of doing a dual role for a while, and that worked out, ended up, giving him kind of a promotional opportunity as well. So I think the conversation about career conversation, career development, advancement, growth, we don't have an L&D department yet at my company, so it falls on HR and TA to sort of do it all. But I think those are important, very important things, and you also want to show your employees that you're invested in them and their career growth.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Christina, at Universal Music, we had like L&D, D&I, L&D, did I say that already? And comp,
Yeah.
right, in the same room, planning. Right? So I think so that connection is there, they reported to the same, well, not comp, but everybody else reported to the same boss, so there's that focused leadership. So I think getting those, it goes a long way to put people in the same room and plan together, and then just kind of put some good milestones to come back and say, are we hitting or not? So my first recommendation to people, if they're not already doing, is get your L&D, get your HR, get your recruiting and comp in the same room to plan, just so everybody's on the same page, because the comp people have a lot of interesting information because they're tracking promotions and transfers at laterals at upward.
In the market.
Yeah, in the market. So and then you combine that with recruiting for, again, the market space too. Those are some interesting conversations, and you just, okay, now let's whiteboard and what's the go forward plan. But to have those parties in the same room is essential. Otherwise, kind of everybody's doing their own thing, and hopefully it'll work. But,
Totally. Yeah, we have to talk to each other, right? We don't win the race without being able to pass the baton to the next person, and we're not able to pass the baton if we don't know where our teammates are. So, absolutely. One last thing, just to sort of upvote David's comment. He mentioned that training programs to help upskill groups that are known for shortages are really important. Absolutely. And then the other thing about robbing Peter to pay Paul, sort of off of Sean's comment, totally agree with that. The other way to make sure that we're obtaining more diverse groups of folks, in addition to sort of lowering the requirements for openings, which I'm not really sure is true, but also opening up the geographical location that we're willing to recruit from is really important too. I know that in specific areas, the availability of talent is just not there. And I think Silicon Valley is a really good example of that, where just the area itself is not very diverse. And so all companies in this area end up having that issue until they really open up the spectrum of where they're willing to recruit from. So important. Well, thank everyone so much for joining us today. Shameless plug, as you might know, most colleges and universities have gone back to school, even if only virtually, and it makes us start thinking as TA professionals what our university recruiting programs are going to look like. So next month, second Tuesday, same time, same place, we will be talking about university recruiting programs and how to add diversity into those programs. And we're going to walk away with some real-time actionable steps that you can take in order to not only recruit from HBCUs and other diverse schools, but also how to leverage diverse groups of students within the schools that you're already recruiting from. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining, and we will see you next time.
thank you. All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye.